Hello, my dear friends. You are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and this is the daily Frontline report from the Ukrainian theatre of war. Yesterday, Zelensky once again made threats, saying that they had decided to expand the geography of long-range strikes against Russia. At the same time, the Minister of Defense of Italy stated that Ukraine is not capable of taking back the territories occupied by Russia, that Russia will never return them even if the West continues to provide assistance. So we see these completely different moods, Zelensky's triumphant tone on one side and defeatist comments coming from the Italians on the other. The fighting on the front continues, and we continue to analyze the situation together with you. So, my friends, during the past 24 hours, several good reports have arrived from the front lines. There have been advances in different sectors. Russian forces have moved forward, attention in 4 cities, including in Pokrovsk, where the encircled Ukrainian garrison continues to deteriorate. But let us go step by step. We'll start today not from the usual Huliaipol area of the Zaporizhzhia region, but from a sector further south, the area around Myrnohrad and Primorsk. Here, Russian troops made a powerful breakthrough, advancing through the residential zone of Primorsk by as much as 2 kilometers and 700 meters, reaching the center of the settlement. As you can see on the map, Primorsk is a large village stretching along the Kakhovka reservoir. For understanding, the distance from the southern edge of the settlement to its northern edge is almost 11 kilometers, and before the war, the population was nearly 4,000 people. In other words, it is a settlement of considerable size. This is therefore a truly significant local success. But as always, what looks neat and clean on the map, the red line moving forward, the area newly shaded, in reality means extremely fierce fighting. The battles here, in Primorsk and in neighboring Myrnohrad, are very intense. The Ukrainian command is throwing in more and more forces, doing everything to hold the Russian army at this line for obvious reasons. If the Russian army captures Myrnohrad and Primorsk, it will then reach the line of Kostiantynivka and Myrnohrad, and from there, look at the map. The distance to Zaporizhzhia itself is only 12 kilometers. Moreover, those 12 kilometers are empty terrain, just open fields and a few roads, no settlements in between. That's why Ukrainian troops are now clinging to every position they can. Footage from the Russian side shows extremely brutal fighting inside Primorsk. Russian soldiers are inflicting very heavy losses on Ukrainian troops. Yet despite the ferocity of these battles, and despite constant Ukrainian reinforcements, the Russian side keeps pushing forward. Fighting now is already taking place in the very center of Primorsk. What are the prospects here? For full and stable control, it is necessary to widen the base of the advance, to straighten the front line by clearing out the dacha areas and private sector east of Pokrovsk Street. Once that foundation is secured, Russian forces will be able to establish a firm presence in the settlement center. However, full capture of Primorsk is not yet in question. Personally, I doubt we'll see that not only in the near future, maybe not even within this year, because there is still more than 6 kilometers of residential area remaining, and each meter of advance here, as I said, is achieved with extreme difficulty. So we'll keep observing this sector. Now we move further east, to the eastern Dnipropetrovsk direction, where today it was officially announced that the settlement of Vyshnev has come under full control of the Russian army. Things for the Ukrainian armed forces here are truly grim. Russian fighters are capturing at least 1 settlement per day on this axis. If you remember, just about 2 months ago, the distance from Russian positions to the Huliaipol-Pokrovsky highway was roughly 20 kilometers. And in only 2 months, the Russian army has almost completely covered that distance. It's not difficult to imagine what happens next. After Huliaipol, Russian forces could strike either toward the Orikhiv direction or toward the key city of Myrnohrad. This city houses a large part of Ukraine's military industry and serves as a major logistical hub for the entire Eastern Front. And now let's talk about Pokrovsk. Things there for the Ukrainian army are extremely bad. Their defenses are collapsing rapidly. So the Pokrovsk sector, I've seen how some cartographers are already drawing the map as if the bottleneck has completely closed and the city is under full blockade. That's not entirely true. There is not yet a complete physical blockade. The corridor still exists. but the chances for Ukrainian troops to escape through it are almost zero. Some lucky individuals might break out, but overall, for those inside, it's either 200 or 300, as soldiers grimly say, dead or wounded. This blockade means no supply of ammunition, no troop rotation, no reinforcements, no logistics at all. Because of that, the Ukrainian garrison has started to collapse not only in the southern parts of the city, but even north of the railway lines, in the northern part of Pokrovsk. During the past day, Russian soldiers advanced 500 meters and entered the territory of the industrial equipment plant. This factory zone is a major defensive stronghold. Yet part of it is now under Russian control, although the fighting remains extremely heavy. The Ukrainian command understands perfectly well. If they lose this plant, Russian forces will be able to concentrate there and, using it as a fortified area, quickly clear out all the surrounding private housing. After that, everything collapses, and the entire northern part of Pokrovsk would likely fall soon. That is why a brutal battle is raging right now for that factory, and the coming days there will be decisive, whether the Russian army manages to crush resistance or not. Even worse for Ukrainian troops is the situation beyond the railway. Over the past 24 hours, Russian soldiers advanced 450 meters, reaching school number 3 on Chkalova Street and school number 15 on Bankova Street. Heavy fighting is ongoing around those reinforced buildings. The key point is that now only 650 meters remain before Russian units link up their positions. And what happens then? Then the main part of Pokrovsk, including the central multi-story residential districts, will be completely encircled. Additionally, Russian troops have moved forward another 1 kilometer and 500 meters, clearing private housing blocks and entering the suburban village of Ro. Those streets and houses beyond the Shossena street line are technically not Pokrovsk proper. They belong to the adjacent village of Ro, but it's tightly connected to the city. Russian forces have entered and partially control it. Collapse after collapse. That's the picture now. Russian soldiers also raised their flag at the entrance to the city, at the very spot where several months ago Zelensky posed for photos. It's almost becoming a tradition. Every time Zelensky visits a city and says, "We will hold it," that city's fate seems sealed. However, Ukrainian forces are facing problems not only in Pokrovsk, but also in neighboring Myrnohrad. Yesterday, Russian troops advanced from the area of Balahan in armored vehicles, covering 900 meters, and managed to land infantry near the Molodizhny residential district. As you can see on the map, Molodizhny is an area of high-rise apartment buildings. In fact, there are 3 such districts here: Molodizhny, Vostochny, and Svetliye, forming a single block of multi-story housing. If the Ukrainian army loses them, it will drastically change the future battle for the city, since control over these districts would give Russian forces dominance over the entire eastern part of Myrnohrad. You can also check how Deep State currently draws the map of Pokrovsk. The city is completely surrounded from the north by Russian forces. And we move on. Not only Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad are in trouble for the Ukrainian army, they are also beginning to fall back in Kostiantynivka. Over the last day, Russian troops advanced along Samarkandska and Volkovska streets by 700 meters, reaching the tram depot. Whether they managed to secure the building is not yet confirmed. We are waiting for updates. But if they did, it would soon allow the clearing of private houses within that entire rectangular block, creating a strong foothold inside Kostiantynivka itself. However, I must note that for now the fighting in Kostiantynivka remains local rather than large-scale. The main Russian effort is concentrated on Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, and where the pressure works, they keep pressing. It turned out that the Ukrainian defense here, around Kostiantynivka, is not solid. It can be broken, and Russian troops are exploiting those weak points. What happens next, we'll see. I've already said, storming a large city like Kostiantynivka head-on, as they did with Bakhmut or Toretsk, would be, in my opinion, a very costly and pointless idea. The city is 1.5 times larger than Bakhmut, or Artemovsk, as some still call it. So I'm convinced that the main Russian plan here will not be to break through the city directly, but to cut the H20 highway. Yet that's still a distant prospect. Personally, I don't expect Kostiantynivka to fall before the summer of 2026. Still, the fact that Ukrainian forces are gradually losing ground here is undoubtedly a positive sign for the Russian side. What else can I tell you about the front? Kupiansk. There too, Ukrainian troops are in trouble, falling back again. Russian forces have advanced 400 meters along Uyutny Lane, reaching its end, and have expanded their zone of control by clearing several dozen private houses. So as you can see, the Russian army is steadily cleaning up the blocked areas. Some Ukrainian groups surrender, like yesterday, when a group of 5 soldiers raised a white flag. Others refuse, and you understand what happens then. Overall, the situation on the front is favorable for the Russian army. Assault operations are ongoing simultaneously in 7 cities, while in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, the battles are already in their final stage. In the coming days, I believe both Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad will fully come under Russian control. What we're witnessing now is the agony of the Ukrainian grouping, and it seems both Zelensky and Syrskyi have already accepted that fact. Our source reports that the office of the president, Bankova Street, has strictly forbidden anyone from sharing negative news from the front. A massive information campaign is now underway, claiming that everything on the front line is stable. Even the cartographers are part of it. They are drawing beautiful, optimistic maps. But this will eventually lead to disaster, says the Telegram channel Legitimny. The armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to take control of vast areas from the Ukrainian forces, yet in the media, everything supposedly remains fine. A new Huliaipol direction has already formed, where the settlement of Huliaipol may fall into encirclement by the end of the year. After that, Orikhiv would be next, and the Russian army could break through into open operational space all the way towards Zaporizhzhia. The worse the real situation becomes at the front, especially in the so-called Pokrovsk funnel, the louder Zelensky's statements grow about imaginary victories and thousands of supposedly recaptured kilometers. Some observers are still sounding the alarm over Pokrovsk because the situation there is truly on the brink of catastrophe. The new Ukrainian reinforcements thrown into the battle have brought no results, only heavy losses. Our source reports that as Pokrovsk collapses, Andriy Yermak is preparing a media attack against Oleksandr Syrskyi, who is to be made the scapegoat for society, in order to shield Zelensky himself from blame. In reality, Zelensky and Yermak together are personally running the entire military case. Alternative for Germany has invaded Western Germany, reports analyst Yuri Podolyaka. Germany is now experiencing the same deep mental shifts among its citizens that recently occurred in the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and other Western nations. The party Alternative for Germany, considered far-right within the local political establishment, has now broken out of its traditional stronghold. Previously, it had achieved victories only in the territory of the former East Germany, everywhere except Berlin. According to the latest polls, it has now surged forward and overtaken its opponents in 27 districts of the former Western Germany. For now, this may not seem decisive, but it is already a clear trend. As Germany's economic situation continues to worsen, this trend will only intensify. Germany must change its economic and tax policy, otherwise it will not avoid upheavals, warned Alice Weidel, co-chair of the Alternative for Germany party. According to her, inflation has so severely undermined the well-being of citizens that people can no longer afford to save money. In the second half of October, reports indicated continued weakening of the German economy. Its industry is suffering from structural problems and from American tariffs. Dmitry Peskov also made several statements. He said that Ukraine has ignored the draft documents and proposals submitted by Russia through working groups. The current pause in the negotiation process on Ukraine is due entirely to Kiev's unwillingness to continue the dialogue. The overwhelming majority of European Union countries, Peskov said, remain in a militaristic mainstream. The actions of the EU, including those concerning Russian assets, will have a very negative impact on the European Union's future. Kiev will continue to beg for money, and Europe must prepare to pay more and more. Russian troops along the line of contact constantly hear foreign languages over their radios, Peskov added. He also noted that Germany is trying to pressure China, even while publicly declaring its desire to de-escalate relations. Germany sent an official diplomatic note of protest to China, expressing concern about export restrictions on microchips and rare earth metals. Before that, Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul cancelled his first planned visit to China after Beijing agreed to hold only one of the requested meetings, a gesture perceived in Berlin as a diplomatic snub. At the start of the year, China had increased exports of goods to Germany after the introduction of tariffs by Donald Trump, redirecting supplies from the United States to Europe and thereby putting pressure on local European producers. Later, the Netherlands nationalized the private company Nexperia, after which China imposed restrictions on imports of certain technological products into the entire European Union. Germany notably refrained from openly protesting the Dutch decision on Nexperia, although that is precisely what Beijing expected. Berlin's silence sets a precedent that may encourage similar moves in the future. China views relations through the lens of the European Union. Germany is the key voice of Europe, and Chinese export restrictions are often aimed not at Berlin personally, but as a signal to the entire EU. China's exports to Europe account for roughly 20.7% of its total export volume, while Germany's share in Chinese exports is about 2.97%. A redirection of those exports would not be pleasant for China, but it is entirely possible. Meanwhile, Germany imports from China virtually irreplaceable items, microchips and components, batteries, solar panels, rare earth metals, and spare parts for the automotive and electronics industries. If supplies stop, all German production will grind to a halt. Companies are already suffering enormous losses. As a result, some of them have begun establishing direct contacts with Chinese partners, negotiating short-term 6-month supply agreements. But even so, Germany continues to speak from a position of strength. For example, Volkswagen is suspending operations at several key factories in Germany because of supply disruptions of Nexperia chips. The Dutch government seized control of Nexperia for reasons of technological security, and in response, China banned the export of its components. Volkswagen Group is going through difficult times even without these economic pirates. In 2024, the company's operating profit dropped by 15% compared with the previous year. In the first quarter of 2025, profitability stood at only 0.5%. Producing cars directly in Germany has become too expensive. High energy and labor costs make local factories unprofitable. Therefore, Volkswagen is gradually reducing production in Germany, planning to close several plants and transfer part of its capacities to Eastern Europe and the United States. To cut costs and bypass tariffs, the company is betting on electric vehicles, but sales in Europe are weak, and on the Chinese market, Volkswagen is already losing to BYD, NIO, Xiaomi, and Geely. To stay afloat, the concern is lowering prices for its ID.3 and ID.4 models, launching a joint brand with the Chinese company XPeng for locally produced models, and promising to release a new electric Golf in 2027. The moral decline is undermining the future of the United States, writes the Washington Post. America, it says, is suffering from an acute shortage of spiritual depth and moral guidance. Today, many Americans feel lost. This manifests in high levels of loneliness, depression, anxiety, and other destructive disorders, the newspaper notes. The problem is fundamental. American society no longer has a clear understanding of who Americans are as a people, who they wish to become, and what kind of world they want to build. This, according to the publication, leads to a civilizational crisis of identity. The heavily promoted consumer economy has turned into an economy of dependency, producing a special kind of product, the eternally dissatisfied consumer, which perfectly serves the interests of corporations. For a long time in America, moral judgment was considered a matter of private life, while the state deliberately avoided such topics. Business leaders rarely thought about whether their work actually improved the lives of employees or customers. What mattered most was consumption itself. The key instrument of revival, the paper argues, could become the system of secondary and higher education. American democracy will not survive another 250 years if it continues to consist of communities without moral orientation and addicted to consumption. Material prosperity alone cannot serve as a foundation. America must restore its spiritual values. According to the well-known French sociologist Emmanuel Todd, respect for traditional values is the foundation of Russia's revival and the main reason for the moral degradation of the West.